Chris Craft Corporation was founded in Algonac, located at the top of Lake St. Clair, at the delta of the St. Clair River. Down to Cupperson's Boat Works. Talk to Tom Cupperson about the early days at Chris Craft. How's everything going on the job today, Tom?
Real good. Real good. It's a cool day, nice and warm inside, so
This is a real nice boat you're working on here. What can you tell me about this one?
well, this is one of two that we're building for a couple fellows. One is for a fellow by the name of Edmondson in Port Yorn, and the other one in the other shop is for Johnson down in New Hampshire. We built a couple 27-footers for fellows a few years ago, and they liked them so well that these guys, they decided they'd like a couple 26-footers built.
What year, Tom, were these boats produced?
As near as I can remember, they were current in 1928 or 29. They started out with a flush deck here, and along about 1924, but later they got it this upswept, both in the front deck and the engine hatch. Sort of changed the look on it, but it's an original 26-foot hull that they started in 1923.
Tom, when did you start working for Chris Craft?
It was in June 1924.
1924. Well, I have some old pictures, but you mind sitting looking at those with me?
No, I'll come up anytime you want to.
Explain what was going on in the old days when you were working there at Chris Craft.
That's interesting to me to see what was happening 50 years ago too.
All right, Tom, we'll set up and we'll do that. Thank you.
Okay.
This is a business card of Chris Smith and Company. It's interesting to notice that you have Christopher Columbus Smith and you have Hank Smith listed on the top of the card. Boat builders, machine shop repair department, builders of gasoline launches, row and sail boats and canoes and etc. in Algonac, Michigan.
Dad, there's a picture here of Algonac here with the probably one of the first known pictures of the Smith Boat Company here right inside Algonac. You want to tell us about this?
That's the way it looked when I first remember that Chris Craft Boat and Engine Company. This is where my dad worked when he was a young fellow, and when we come back there in 1924, it was changed. It was a printing office then. But when I was a small boy, about 7 years old, Dad brought me up to Algonac. We lived in Detroit at the time, and we went through this place, and there were boats in there, and there was a boat well in the back where they tied their boats. And I recall going up on a porch out in the back of this place, looking out on the river, and there was a sailing boat going up the river, and they had a telescope setting up on a tripod there, and we all looked in this tripod telescope, trying to see if this boat sailboat could make it up the river again, the current.
So that was about 1915 then. If you were born what, 1907?
Yeah.
And you were about 7 years old, so right around
Yeah.
1915. Okay. And in this picture here, we got Chris Smith with his foot up on a log there, but I notice in right behind him there's looks like a store window with paddles in it. Now, at the factory store here, could you go in and buy anything you wanted, as far as you know, or was it more or less a factory?
Well, I presume it was a store that you could go in and buy a pair of oars or paddle for your canoe, or probably anchors and things like that. Probably a ship chandler store like we even have today, like Beaver's. That's the way they started out.
All right, now, at this time with Chris Craft, now, were they building runabouts or more with duck boats and stuff?
Well, I don't recall that, but this is the factory where they built the speedboats, the Miss Detroit, Miss Minneapolis, and some of the early racing boats.
How long would them boats have been?
Well, some of those boats were only 20 feet long, 21, 22 feet long.
Was that as big a boat as they would build in this factory, or bigger?
Well, there were longer boats. The older displacement boats were longer and narrower.
Right. Like the cigarette boats of today.
Well, pretty much, yes.
Dad, this picture here with Chris and some duck boats is one I've never seen before. Now these are known to be the first boats he ever built, isn't it?
As far as I know, they were duck boat builders, canoe builders, and fishing boat builders in small launches. The fact is, they could have built launches up to 40 feet long, because there were some around Algonac, probably in the late 30s, 50 feet long. But I don't know whether Chris Smith and Sons built those launches or not. There was the Tiger and the Pilot, and boats that run from Algonac to the Flats.
But looking at this picture here, if you wanted to say the start of Chris Craft, that's it, eh?
Well, I don't know enough about it to say that this was the first boats they ever built.
No, I mean the style.
Well, that was a standard duck boat called the pumpkin seed type duck boat at that time.
And Dad, this looks like the Reliance 3 here. Is this one of the early speedboats, or?
Now, this is the type of a racing boat that was current before the hydroplanes came in. And those boats were displacement boats, and they cut through the water. But they were very popular about the time when it probably was about 1912, 14. My dad used to run a boat like that for a fellow by the name of Wadsworth. And I think the name of it was Black Raven. And he took us for a ride once when I was a little kid.
No, were these boats very fast?
Oh, they probably do 25, 30 miles an hour.
That was pretty fast for that time.
Oh, yeah. They really split the water.
And Dad, here we are up on Michigan and Clay Street here, and this is a Smith home. What can you tell us about this?
Well, I don't know much about the home, but I know that Chris Smith and his wife lived there in later years, and probably Hammy lived there with his folks at that time.
Now, they have a gang of kids there?
They probably raised their family.
Here we have a picture of Chris. What can you remember about Chris himself around the plant, Tom?
He had a pretty good sense of humor, and he was usually walking around the place, seeing how things was going. And I recall one day that the restrooms were between the buildings there, and he saw smoke coming out of the place. So he thought it'd be a good trick to walk in there with a bucket of water and throw it right in there. Fellas scattered from one end of the place to the other, coming like rats out of a barrel.
You mean there was a rule there was no smoking in the plant anywhere?
Well, there was a rule. They weren't supposed to spend too much time at it, but there's always a bunch that will spend a lot of time sitting around talking and smoking. Another time I recall he was walking through the plant, and he said to a fellow that was one of the boat carpenters, he said, "Al, you see that fellow working up there on the roof?" He said, "There's the slowest man I ever had working for me." And it didn't occur to him that the fellow that he was talking about was the son of the man he was talking to. Chris was pretty well liked and respected by most of the people around the shop. I know I always got along good with him. Called me Choppy, the same as he did my dad. Everybody in our family was called Choppy.
Very good.
Yeah, one time that he was walking down to the shop and he stopped to my house and saw my wife sitting on the porch. He said, would you like to take me down to my shop? I see you've got a car there. I'm pretty tired. So she drove him down to the factory. It was about a half-mile from our house.
Now, Dad, I know Chris Smith and his brothers and the family there like to fish a lot. Now, apparently, they were out this day. Where's this at here, and who is this in the picture?
This looks like the boiler room of the first factory there, where they, got steam up and heated the place in the wintertime. Of course, they used the steam all summer for bending wood. But Mr. Smith, Chris Smith, was semi-retired about this time, and he used to go fishing just about every day, he and Mrs. Smith. And I recall some days they'd bring in a string of fish just about like those three right there. This picture must have been taken around 1938 because I recall I was working in the service department at that time, and he used to come in with his boat in the afternoon, and sometimes I'd see fish nearly that size in his fish tank, 3 or 4 of them. So he must have been a good fisherman.
I know on occasion everybody knows the Chris Craft for building speedboats and large cruisers and stuff like that. Now I know they once in a while they build a houseboat, and this looks like one of them here.
I don't think that was a factory-built project. I think Owen had this scow built out in the yard, and then he had house carpenters put this housing quarters on top of his scow.
Now we know the Smiths like to go hunting and fishing. Apparently it was for that, eh?
Yeah, they'd tow that down to the flats and spend their the hunting season when they went down there on that houseboat. But then in the fall they'd tow it back up to tie it behind the factory for the summer.
Now, Dad, when they moved from downtown Algonac just to the outskirts of the city limits, they set up all their new buildings. These are it, eh?
Well, they started out with a building from a T back in there, where they started building their 26-footers, and then they built this first long building that you see back from this first one. Of course, the building on the left is the mill. They had that building in probably 1925. That one you see, the second one in the back. 1927, when they built the first 22-footers, they had so many orders that they built this new building for the 22-footer to be built.
So once they got their new mill and everything in operation, the orders really started coming in.
Oh yeah, they sold a lot of boats that year, 1927. That was quite a popular boat, that 22 Cadet.
And Dad, I can see up in the back of that picture there, you can see boats being set up in the stalls, and you see various points of production here. You want to explain some of the steps here?
Well, you see a buck or stall on each side of the building up in front there. See the fellows there where the boat frames are set up? They're working on the side. There's also a fellow working on the sides of another boat up there. Now there were two crews setting up the frames, putting side planking on.
No.
Then they had chain falls and tracks, and they take them right off the stalls and flop them over and bottom plank them right between the stalls there. And these fellows in the foreground here are also putting on the bottoms there and planing the bottoms for sanding. Of course, naturally, this fellow right here on the left, he's putting a coat of paint on. The operation here, they'd lift the side of the boat up and they'd dress the hull and sand it and put a coat of stain on it.
Hey, Dad, I know this is an early picture of Chris Craft, but one of the things I noticed, sir, with this guy on the right here putting putting a garber plank on the bottom there. He's got a, it looks like either an electric drill and an electric driver.
Oh yeah, we had good fast tools in those days. We even had those automatic chucks on our drills. Everything was for fast operation.
Now, what other operations? I notice way in the background looks like there's another boat being set up on a stall. What types of boats are these here? Can you tell?
Oh yeah, those were 22 footers, and either 22 or 24 footers, and they were building about 4 of them a day. Each one of those bucks up there, they'd side plank them and put the engine beds in them. Every 4.5 hours they'd turn a boat off of one of them. And these bottom plankers, to keep production up, they had to put the bottoms on. They had to dress the hull sides to keep them boats flowing through the shop.
Now, all the plank they would put on the bottoms and the sides. Now, these were all pre-cut, right?
The straight plank were, the forward plank on the bottom were shaped. They were run on a shaper, but you had to fit them also, just the way we do today.
Okay. We got a boat sitting on the stall here. Now, what part of the shop are we in here?
This is the side toward the mill, and these fellows that are setting the frames up, putting the side plank on. When they get those side plank on, they'll take the boat off this stall with a couple of chain falls and track to go across there. And then these fellows on the left here, they're putting the skin plank on, and then when they get that skin plank on the canvas, they'll put the bottom plank on. And then that boat will be slid back so as to make room for another boat to come off this stall. This fellow in the foreground with the white shirt on that's standing up, that's Louis Biscorner.
I'll be darned.
Now, how long would it take once they started setting the frames and the keel up on the stall and putting the hull plank on the side? Well, how long of an operation are we talking about there?
About 4 hours and a half.
Wow.
You know, this guy here is not running frame screws because the frame screws would already be shot in, but he must be running rib there because they're short.
Yeah, they'd have a fella underneath, and they'd put a screw at the top and bottom. Then they'd get out and from underneath the boat and drill them holes and nail the screws in there with a hammer. And then this fella up on top there, he'd zip them in with one of those high-speed drivers.
Now, I notice while this guy's doing the bottom here, they got somebody bunging the hull side all at the same time, so they didn't miss a step in production.
Oh, they had 3 or 4 of those fellas putting them plugs in all the time. Fella out in the mill cutting them all the time.
Now, how long would this basic operation here take?
They had to synchronize it so there'd be just enough fellas working on the bottoms to keep up with the fellas on the side that was throwing the boats off in 4 hours to 4.5 hours. So every 2 hours they had to be putting a bottom on a boat and getting it through there.
So then it could move from station to station.
Yeah.
The bottom and all the bungs are on there, and the hull sides are looking good, and we've moved up to another station here on the production line. What are we doing here?
Well, the boat's all set to go in to have the deck put on it. Now in that position right there, they'd take a skill saw and cut the shear line. They'd tack a batten on there and they'd cut that shear line. And they probably put the rudder in there and the rudder or the shaft log, put the skin plank screws from the inside, and then they shove her back in the next bay there. And they put the decks in. See those fellas putting the covered boards on there?
Yeah, put the coaming clamps on.
Put the coaming clamps in there, and it was a pretty fast operation going through there.
We got the coaming clamps on and the deck frames here, and now we're in the bunging stage on the front deck here, and we're in another phase of the production line here. What's next after the bunging here?
Well, if that was a cadet, they'd probably put the coamings in, sand the deck up a little bit there, cut those plugs off, put the coamings in, and then put the cowl in, on the front, at the end of the front deck there, and they put the back seat in there, the front seat and the lining in, and shove it back in the varnish room. That building behind there, or section of the building, is the paint department. So after it goes through about 3 steps here, it would be in the paint department.
Now all the pieces for the deck and the coaming and the cowl there, and that's all pre-made, right? All ready to drop in.
They were all mill machined, and they put the boards up in those racks. That rack right above that boat.
Oh, yeah.
Thing. The stock boys would bring the stuff out and put them in them racks, and the fellows would put the decks on and just pull the decking out of there, and put the decks on.
Dad, I see that's Jay there on the right there, and this picture looks unusual. Why don't you decipher what it really is here?
Well, I can tell you that it's a boat in the foreground, and the boss painter, Del Ames, he's got the brush in his hand, and Mr. J. Smith there's looking at what he's doing there.
Well, I noticed there's a bunch of holes no bungs in the holes there, but they're supposed to be varnished, and I think this picture's taken out of context, isn't it?
Well, it makes a good picture of 2 fellas alongside of a boat, son.
Okay. Grandpa was involved with installing motors. Now, would this be his type of department?
Yeah, that's the department that he was overseeing, the installation of those motors, and seeing that they were ready to run when the boat was put out on the launching platform. The fellow in the foreground, of course, you can see that he is the painter who put the government numbers on and the names on the boat. Mr. Burns from Algonac used to do that down there. He later became the town chiropractor.
Now, Dad, when they had this department to put the motors in, now would they put the gas tanks and all the instruments and wiring in this department also?
Oh yeah, sure. That's where they did the wiring, put the hardware on, and the steering gear,
All the finishing
windshield,
touches.
yeah,
Eh?
all that stuff was put on in there.
And then out the back door to test them in the river.
Yeah.
Now, did they test every boat?
Well, they did at that time. They give each one a little run at the dock. They run the motor at the dock, and some of them they took out in the river and give them a test out in the river. But I think they discontinued that in later years when they got building too many boats.
Another shot of the motor and hardware installation department. What size of boats we got here? And
Those look to me like the 24-footers that were built. It could possibly even been 26-footers like we're building now. That motor in the close to the boat there looks like a Kermass 6, and it takes a pretty good sized boat to handle that motor. I don't think they ever put those in a 24-footer.
we got one being shipped out here on a truck today. What can you tell us about this?
Well, this is the first shipping department they organized. And this building in the background was the building that I worked in when I started there in 1924. And we were building a boat and a half a week in there.
Now, that's a complete boat, right?
Well, I don't know if it was complete, but that's how many boats we were putting the side plank on, framing up, and sending them back to the bottom plankers and the hull dressers.
Now, before they brought the railroad into the plant there, they shipped them out by truck, then, eh?
Yeah, that railroad didn't come in until later, that spur they put in.
But all
the boats they were building were around 26 feet long at that time. And this looks like a little smaller boat. So that building was used strictly for a shipping department at that period of time.
it's like this truck here is really straining with this boat on there. Do you know what model and year this is?
No, but that still looks like it's pretty close to the same period of time, the same buildings. But I would say that it had to be around 1936 or 37, because that boat was current about that time. Looks like about a 30-footer. They still got that same truck there with those little narrow wheels. I think they discontinued after one of the fellows that worked in the yard tipped it over with a boat on it.
And Dad, we got a big cruiser here on in one of the production steps here. What can you tell us about this one?
Well, when we were coming out of the Depression, a lot of the boat factories were building cruisers, and they were not considered a real expensive cruiser at that time. So they were all in competition with boats about this size, around 30, 32 feet long, and trying to give as much boat as they could for the money. And Chris-Craft built quite a few boats similar to that one.
Now they built more of these than the speedboats at that time. Then after the Depression.
Really not, but because they got into smaller speedboats or runabouts, and there was a time when the small boats, they built about, probably half a dozen a day.
Another production line picture here. What can you recall about this?
Well, they were getting into building quite a few cruisers along about that time. Those boats looked to be about 26 feet long, 24 feet long. They built a lot of them in those days, and they were quite popular.
I noticed
the speedboat era was people that were more affluent that would buy those, but then the people that wanted a boat to go Sunday cruising and stay overnight on, they were the factory workers and merchants who would buy these boats, take short cruises on. And they sold quite a few of those.
Dad, I know in 1926, Chris-Craft and Algonac tied into what was then the interurban freight line system then, and they really started making a lot of boats and shipping them out. And they shipped them out all over the world. Do you recall how big of trains you would see leaving the plant there, and with how many flat cars and boats?
No, I didn't pay much attention to the boats that were going out on the trains, but most of them, I think, that went out on the flat cars were cruisers. The smaller boats went away by trailer and by water. I'm talking about the runabouts, the speedboats, and one thing and another. Of course, they did put some of the runabouts in boxcars and ship them, but I don't think too many went on flat cars like those cruisers you see there.
Now, if the cruisers were going to be shipped in other parts of the countries, of course you wouldn't. There was no St. Lawrence Seaway, and there was no interstate highway system to get them there, so the rail was the only way to get them, to ship them.
Probably most of them went out by rail like that. Of course, most of your highway bridges were quite low in those days, some of those, especially in some of those southern states where those highway bridges, they just barely, a truck would barely get under them, let alone a cruiser like that on a truck.
And I noticed that engine says Chris-Craft on the side there. Now the Chris-Craft, they had their own railroad system, eh?
Oh, they had through the yard there, but then when they got out on the regular route, they used the old interurban line that went by Chris-Craft plant up to Marine City, and then they tied onto that rail line from Marine City to Port Huron.
Dad, we're over in the engine department here. It looks like we got piles of blocks and stuff. What can you comment here on what we're seeing?
The only thing I can comment on there, it looks like that was a V8 engine that Chris-Craft built there, with all those blocks there setting in the foreground, and they would assemble those engines, of course starting at the block and putting the crankshafts and the pistons in. They built a lot of motors in those days, but along about 1929 and 30. After that, other companies furnished the motors for the boats.
But generally speaking, they completely built a motor there themselves, didn't they?
Oh yeah, they had that block cast for that Chris-Craft V8 motor, and that was quite a popular motor. It had a lot of power. They built 50 of those 38-foot commuters and put those motors in, and they went fast too.
Dad, I know. Besides Grandpa working at Chris-Craft, your brothers did too. Who worked on the engines?
Andy worked there before he went in the Army, back in what year was it we got in World War II?
41.
1941, and he assembled them engines, and Art also worked in the motor division there, assembling motors.
So the whole family got involved in this in one way or another through the years, eh?
Oh yeah, there was George worked in the wiring department and in the service department repairing drills. Jack worked in the production end in some of the plants. That was after he got out of the service. And my brother Bob and I worked in the carpenter shop. So we all did our stint at Chris-Craft.
Now, Dad, we're back in the motor shop here, and you can see the rotisseries there for the motors to assemble there. Who are some of these people here?
Well, the one fellow in the middle there is Jay Smith, the president, and the co-designer of that engine. And it looks like Elmer Jasper to his left. And it also looks like his son Jay Jr. on the right, but I'm not sure about that.
One of the things I noticed looking at this picture here, it's only a single cockpit in the front rather than a double, which I would be used to seeing. Tell me about this boat.
That boat probably was built in 1923 or early 24. When I was working at Chris-Craft in about the summer, late summer of 24, they made a double cockpit forward there and a shorter one aft. And after they made it, the first boat that way, they liked the way it run and the way it looked and the way it sold. It was more popular. So they discontinued that short cockpit in the front like that, and they never built any more as far as I ever remember.
It looks like one of the Smiths in the back next to the driver. Who is that?
That's Bernard Smith driving the boat, and I'm pretty sure that's his son Elwood sitting alongside him on his right side there.
The name of that boat's the Thelma H, eh?
You see that 70A, it's got to be a real early boat because it was a long time ago when they used that 70A Algonac, 70th boat that was registered around Algonac.
That's an old one.
That's a first good picture I've seen of the Tajmo dock in Algonac here. I also noticed a change in this Chris-Craft model from the single forward to the double forward cockpit here.
Yeah, that's what I say, that after they changed to this double cockpit forward and the single aft, I don't remember them ever making another one of them boats of that type. They changed the ventilators too on that engine hatch. Notice those little round ports there? But that Tajmo Park dock, that was over on Harson Island.
Oh, okay, that's not
rather than Algonac.
Okay.
That's where the old ferry boats used to stop there, and there was a parking behind there with the dance halls and the merry-go-rounds and everything, and picnics. They used to have picnics up there. The three boats used to, back in 1923 and 24, there were three steamers running from Detroit to Port Huron, and they'd stop there and unload their passengers, and coming back from Port Huron, they would take the people back to Detroit.
So there was more than one Tajmo Park dock here through the Algonac area.
No, there's only one Tashmo Park, and that's where the boat marine is today.
Oh, okay. Dad, I know most people think of Chris Craft as smaller runabouts, and I know this looks like one of these water taxis here. Can you tell us about some of these larger boats they built?
Well, this was one of a kind, a special boat they built for Mackinac Ferry Service back there in 1934. And they had a time limit on the boat, and we worked on that boat in the hot weather, and it was supposed to be done in the early fall or late summer. And it was quite a large boat, 48 feet long and quite high, and most of us fellow working on it in that hot weather, we were pretty tired. And Mr. Smith asked us to come in on Sunday morning and at 5 o'clock and work on the boat. And I recall I was so blamed tired and didn't get much sleep that night. I didn't go in Sunday morning, and my whole crew didn't go in either. But that fall I got 10 weeks off without pay because I didn't conform with the regulations there. But I suppose I was wrong. I should have showed up.
Dad, one of the touring boats here is sitting right in Algonac, but I noticed right behind there's a big yacht there. Does this look like one of the race days here at Algonac on the river?
It does, all right. Looks like there was something going on down the river there. That big yacht anchored out there, and other boats anchored around it. But if this is a Starline dock in Algonac, I'm not too sure, but this is that 48-footer that they built for ferry service up in Mackinac Island. So it's just another picture of showing all the people that could get on this large cruiser, this 48-footer.
Dad, we're looking east towards the water tower there, and I see the family houseboat sitting there on the left. Now, what about this building here at the plant? What was done there?
That was the first building they built to build cruisers in. That 48-footer was built in there. And landing barges were built in that building, and I worked in there building landing barges. That building was quite a bit larger than it looks there. You could get 3 lines of boats coming out of there. The landing barges was 34 feet long, 36 feet long.
That was for World War II, right?
World War II, yeah. And I worked in there in about 1944 and 45 on landing barges.
Looks like a classic picture here of Chris Smith here. What can you add to this picture here?
Well, he's looks like he's getting ready to take a little trip down to Flats and check out the fishing grounds. And it must be a good day because he's got that stogie in his mouth there, ready to light up and take off. That boat he's in there looks to be a vintage of about 1920, early 1923.
Dad, I know during the years, once in a while, Chris Craft would use something as a background, but here it's the Santa Maria, one of the great Cuthbertson crafts here. What can you tell us about the relationship between us here?
Well, in the foreground is one of the most popular Chris crafts they built. That looks to be about a 42-footer, and in order to show what a nice boat they had to put our Santa Maria in the background. I suppose that represents the old and the new.
Now, is this
They were both great ships.
now, this was basically a catalog picture, wasn't it?
Yeah, that picture was in the catalogs that Chris Craft sold their boats from. And it probably was taken around I would say around 1945, something like that.
Then this would have been one of the first large cruisers right after the war, then.
No, that's a mistake on my part. That's pre-war.
It's a pre-war boat.
Yeah. Now, That's a mistake on my part, son. That's a pre-war boat, and after the war, they cut. You notice how that deck is cut from the fore end, cut down. The boats that were built after the war, the deck was round, curved down from the deck down to the back, an over curve instead of an under curve like that. So it probably was taken about 1942 or some year before we got in the war.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you and Don for coming over and sharing your experiences looking at these pictures. Been real enlightening to look back in the years and see what actually happened in the plants here.
Well, it certainly took me back a long ways. As we say, the best years of my life were spent around there. At least that I was as stronger than I am now.
And still building boats.
Still at it.